I am Dr. Vinita from Department of Public Administration, working as Research Assistant, RCUES, Osmania University, Hyderabad. In this session, we are going to talk about delegation. Now, let's look into the objectives of delegation. This chapter explains the delegation of authority in organizations. After going through this chapter, describe forms of delegation and identify the limitations and hindrance to delegation. Now, let's look into the forms of delegation. Delegation can be of several forms, that is, permanent or temporary, full or partial, conditional or unconditional, formal or informal, direct, immediate and indirect, downward, upward and outward. A brief explanation of the different forms of delegation is firstly permanent or temporary. Now, let's look what is the difference between a permanent and temporary delegation. Delegation may be of permanent or temporary nature. In case of permanent delegation, the powers are delegated forever, subject to normal conditions, only in extraordinary circumstances. This kind of delegation might be revoked. Temporary delegation implies a delegation of powers for a short period of the accomplishment of some end. When the end is achieved, the delegation also ends. Now, let's see what is the difference between a full or partial delegation. Delegation is full when no conditions are attached to the delegation and the person whom powers are delegated has the full authority to decide and take action. It is partial when the decision taken by him is to be approved by the delegating authority. For example, when a diplomat is sent abroad with full powers to negotiate, it is full delegation, but when he is required to get advice or approval before making the final negotiation, it is partial delegation. Now, what is the difference between conditional and unconditional delegation? Delegation can be conditional and unconditional. Delegation is conditional when some conditions are imposed on the person on whom the delegation is conferred. It is unconditional when the subordinate is free to act without any reservation. For example, when the decision of the subordinate is subject to confirmation and revision by the superior, it is conditional delegation. But when he is authorized to act at his discretion, the delegation is unconditional. Formal and informal delegation. Delegation may be formal or informal. Delegation is formal when it is embodied in some written rule, by law or order or note. Much of the delegation of the work found in the department and other organization is informal. It is based on custom or understanding by all concerned. It is not formally recorded, just as no constitution can be wholly written. So also no scheme of delegation in any organization can be written or recorded in its entirely, because new adjustments are constantly being made. The next one is downward, upward, outward and lateral. According to the direction in which a delegation takes place, a distinction may be made between delegation downward, upward, outward and lateral. Delegation downward is by a superior to a subordinate, and this is the most frequent form of delegation. Delegation upward occurs when the delegator delegates authority over himself to a representative. For example, delegation of authority by the electorate to a president to rule over it. Delegation outward means delegation to some outside organization, not subject to the direct control of the delegator. For example, under the recent Bhutan legislation in some of the states, the power to distribute the land to the landless has been vested in ad hoc committee nominated by Sri Vinoba Bhave. This committee are outside the official hierarchy. Lateral delegation implies delegation at one's own level. Now, let us look into what is the difference between direct or immediate or indirect or mediate delegation. Delegation may be direct or immediate or indirect or mediate. In direct or immediate delegation, no third person or intermediate link intervenes between the two parties to delegation. It is the usual form of delegation. In case of indirect or mediate delegation, delegation is made through some third person or intermediate link. Such delegation is rather rare, but two instances of it given by Mooney are the election of the president by the people of USA through a college of electorates and the election of the Pope, in which the Council of the Cardinals intervenes between the congregation and the Pope. Now, let us look into the advantages of delegation. Delegation is a functional imperative for all types of organization. In fact, it is inevitable for any group functioning which necessitates division of work and authority. Delegation is one of the main ways of division of authority. The major advantage of delegations are as follows. First one, without delegating powers where necessary, it would be physically impossible for the head to carry on the entire task of the organization himself. The chief executive or superior officers have to devote their time and energy to the most important executive and managerial tasks. Much of the routine tasks are performed by the lower staff, who pass on the most important business to the chief executive. Delegation takes much of the weight of routine and unimportant work off the shoulders of the chief executive. Effective leadership is made possible only through the process of delegation. The primary benefit of delegation is thus decongestion of work. In the words of Mooney and Riley, the real leader finds easy to delegate authority and is quick to do so whenever he perceives its necessity, but he remains very conscious of the fact that there is one thing he cannot delegate, namely his own authority and the responsibility which it includes. Second, the avoidance of delay in administrative bottlenecks and convenience of citizens requires decision at various field offices rather than in a single headquarters establishment, which is possible only by delegation. Thirdly, in some cases, proper adjustment of policy and program to local condition requires discretionary field decisions. Fourthly, one of the duties of a manager is to train and educate his subordinate in the art of sharing responsibility and making decision, which is possible only through delegation. Delegation of authority therefore has much educative value. The subordinate develop greater loyalty and a sense of identification with the organization if they are made co-partners in the exercise of authority. This is a great moral booster to employees and provide sufficient incentives to work hard. Proper delegation of authority minimizes delay, makes the organization more efficient, economical and operational. Now, let us look into the limitations. The manager should delegate as much as his subordinates can reasonably be expected to do. The art of delegating boils down to the weighting of the chance and consequence of error against the necessities of getting work done and of developing morale and utilizing subordinates to the extent of their abilities. Delegation thus requires knowledge of people and of situations and has to be continuously revised to meet changes in personal program or pressure. It is often forgotten that there are limits to delegation of authority as follows. First, The extent to which authority may be delegated is restricted by constitution, laws, and political institutions. Second, the caliber of staff at the lower level. Delegation to an incompetent individual is clearly impracticable. However, the excuse of staff incompetence as a reason for not making delegation sometimes reflects upon the administrator rather than upon the staff. Thirdly, the extent to which special program requirements necessitates centralization. There may be situations where even the routine work decision may not be delegated. This may be true in the early stages of a new organization or when a crisis situation has developed or developing. Fourthly, the extent to which work is of a stable and repetitive type, delegation is made easier when guidelines can be established for lower levels to take action directly. The conditions of work are changed frequently. Delegation may be more difficult. Fifthly, the size of organization and its geographical location. The larger the organization and the broader its geographical coverage, the greater are the chances for delegating authority. Sixth, the method of internal communication in the organization delegation become difficult if there is a lack of effective procedural system in internal communication and work controls. Seventh, the degree of coordination which is required throughout the organization. A manager must coordinate or fail. Delegation of this power will be tantamount to abduction of responsibility. MP Sharma has identified the following as powers which are usually not delegated. They are the supervision of the work of the first line or intermediate subordinate. Second one, general financial supervision and the power to sanction expenditure above a specified amount. Thirdly, power to sanction new policies and plans and departures from established policy or precedent. Fourthly, rule making power where it is vested in the delegating officer. Fifth, making of the specified higher appointments. Sixth, hearing of appeals from the decisions of at least the immediate subordinate. The retention of these powers in the hands of the chief is essential for the exercise of effective control by him over the working of the organization. Now, let us look into the hindrance to delegation. No doubt, delegation is of great significance for an organization. Still, it is often seen that the superior officers hesitate to delegate authority. In fact, there are several hindrances of delegation which can be grouped as: first one, organizational hindrance; second one, personal hindrance. The first one is organizational hindrance, that is, the lack of established methods and procedures for making delegation a success. It is essential that definite procedure for delegating the authority should be laid down. Delegation becomes easier if the procedure and the rules are well established. Second, lack of coordination and communication. Coordination is the cardinal principle of organization. Without coordination, no organization can work. But coordination requires close communication between the different units of an organization. Without communication, there cannot be any delegation and coordination. Third, unstable and non-repetitive nature of work. Stability is must for delegation. Stable and repetitive work affords a greater degree of delegation. Fourth, size and location of an organization. Size and location of the unit of an organization sometimes hinder the delegation of authority. The larger the organization and broader its geographic coverage, the greater are the chances for delegation. Fifth, lack of proper spelled out position and unspecified terms of delegation of duties and authority cause confusion and adversary, affects the delegation of authority. Now let's look into what is personal hindrance we face in delegation. Personal factors too stand in the way of delegation. These factors can be egoism, tendency to have a credit for everything, fear of disloyalty on the part of the subordinates, lack of confidence in the capacity and competence of the subordinate, lack of emotional maturity on the part of the delegating authority or person, lack of knowledge of what to delegate and how, the fear of accountability to the higher up or the legislature or the people. According to Pfiffner, the following human causes hinder the process of delegation of authority to the authorities. First one, persons who rise to position of hierarchical leadership have more than normal egoism. Second, they are afraid that others will not make the proper decision or carry them out in the desirable manner. Third, they fear that disloyal or subversive powers will develop among strong subordinates. Fourth, strong, vigorous and higher motivated person become impatient with the slower pace and indecisiveness of subordinate. Fifth, in public administration, political consideration often make delegation difficult. Sixth, the cultural heritage of man has been one of the authoritarian leadership. Thus, the practice of delegation is partially dependent on cultural change. Seventh, the act of delegation requires an emotional maturity which is rare even among successful persons. Eighth, the symbol of leadership, those personal qualities and traits which attracts the attention of others, are inconsistent with the philosophy of delegation. Those striving to succeed must make themselves prominent. Ninth, persons who desire to delegate do not know how to do it. 10th, they do not know how far they should delegate, at least for two reasons, that is, the science of organization and management is immature, and second, their work experience has not taught them to neglect, because most organizations fail to practice delegation. In addition to these hindrances, the non-acceptance of delegation on the part of the subordinates too has a great hearing. The main reasons for non-acceptance can be summed up as the first one, the fear of criticism; second one, lack of needed information and resources to do a good job; third, lack of confidence to exercise delegated authority and make correct decision; fourth, lack of initiative and drive; and lastly, more work than one's capacity. No doubt, the above mentioned hindrances stand in the way of delegation, but the significance of delegation in an organization setup cannot be denied. No organization can work without delegation and devolution. As delegation is a must, the only way to meet these challenges is to remove the bottlenecks as far as possible. For removing the organizational hindrances, proper procedures and methods should be established, and all concerned should follow them at the time of delegating the authority and performing the assigned responsibilities of the incumbent holding different positions in organizational hierarchy should be clearly defined. The organization must possess a proper system of coordination and communication at the different levels of administration. Pfiffner has defined the following techniques to make the delegation effective. First, select subordinates capable of shouldering responsibility. Second, define such responsibility. Third, train them to carry it. Fourth, establish general policies and disseminate them throughout the organization. Fifth, strive towards maximum standardization of both functional and housekeeping procedures. Sixth, carry on perpetual management planning consisting of job analysis, organization study, budget planning, workflow study and simplification of system and procedure. Seventh, establish external checks which automatically show danger signals. Eighth, assure the flow of information up, down and across the hierarchy. In part B, we covered the forms, advantages, limitations, the powers which can be delegated and the hindrance to delegation. Delegation is an essential precondition for the growth of an organization. It helps in division of work, reduction of complexity, flexibility in organizational working and raising the morale of the employee. The behavioralists have hailed delegation as the most forward-thinking principle as it opens a new chapter in superior subordinate relationships. Delegation of authority is a very important part of the organizing function. The questions for the sessions are: first one, what are the definitions of delegation? Second, what are the importance and principles of delegation? Third, what are the advantages and disadvantages of delegation?